Hi everybody, new Sunday, new guest. And I'm very glad that he's my guest today because again, this is exactly the right person for the new plugin. Let's go.
Hello everybody, Adam Steele here from HotPole Studios, and today's new plugin is one that is something that I use quite a lot, which is a very new Valve compressor called VariBus. It's very similar in design to something like the Fairchild 670, which is one of the rarest, most expensive, big, scary compressors that you can get out there in the wild. They have something like 23 valves and a whole ton of transformers in and all sorts of crazy stuff. So they end up making your sound quite rich and saturated at the same time as compressing. Now I have a few here that I've used on my theme tune that I'm working on a new version of. I've disabled all the other plugins just while we play around with this. And it's got quite a lot going on here, some of which is behind the scenes. This is, as I said, a very new compressor. If you're not familiar with what that means is this doesn't have a certain fixed compression ratio. You know, most compressors have 4:1, 6:1, 8:1, all that kind of stuff. This doesn't. It kind of has a really big curve, and the more level you put into it, the more this gets towards limiting. It's a kind of bizarre way of working, but it works really well, especially with some of these attack and release setups that we get. So on the face of it, it's actually quite an interestingly easy thing to use. It's got input gain, output gain, threshold, which is how much compression it's going to do in between those two. And then this knob over here does attack and release all in one go. Now, I've used one on bass here, and it sounds chunky. Here's without. And you can hear it's really quite driven because this has loads of valves for saturation on the input and the output. So you can get a completely different drive sound before it's compressed and one after it's compressed. You don't have to hit them super hard, but you certainly can. And in the top left menu here, there is a choice to turn on and off input tubes and output tubes. So you can have this to be much more of a clean kind of sound. But where's the fun in that? You can make a lot of things, like bass is a really good example, and maybe kick drums, snares, that kind of things, really poke through a mix when they're driven fairly hard. And this is a really magical way of doing that. So you have to find your balance between your input gain, output gain, and then your threshold of how much compression you're getting. So you can do things that way and really heavily limit, or you can have it to be more of a gentle compression style just by playing around with those controls. Now, the attack and release is interesting. It starts off with a super fast attack and about a 300 millisecond release, and the attack gets slower and slower, but so does the release, I think. It ends up becoming a much more smooth, slow overall leveler. And then the auto, those are fascinating because the release changes depending on what you're feeding it. Which means that you can have all sorts of clever little things. There is a tiny little screw over here which we can play with, which changes how fast the needles move. I prefer to leave those near default because needles do move quite slowly. There's the L, which is a low frequency kind of cut from the compressor threshold. Really useful if you're using this on something like a master bus so you don't get too much pumping from the low end. The K, I think, is the knee. Again, I would leave that at default, but you can play around with that. And there's the stereo mode down here, which is the default. There's dual mode, which if I click into that, completely separates the left and the right hand side, so I would then have to kind of match the controls if I wanted to do it that way, but they are now not linked, so they behave separately from each other. And then there's M&S, which is not Marks and Spencer's, the British brand. That is mid and side, which then means the top row is down the middle and the bottom row is the side. Much more important, the mid side on something like, again, the master bus. And you can hear how I've got the VariBus on my rhythm guitars, which isn't doing much apart from those chug chugs, but the valve drive is enriching the sound. Here's it without and with the bypass switch. That extra harmonic saturation there, really bringing them forward. Similar kind of thing with the leads. Yes, there is some level increase in there from the output gain as well, but this is all just cumulative, and I could start compressing, say, the lead. And that extra drive there will help that sit at the front. Let's put one of these on the kick as well, just to bring that out. We're going to use the slowest attack and just hit it. That's how we crush a kick. Yeah, that's some real drive right there. I mean, that would need some work on. That's a little heavy. It's a little much. But the point stands that you can play around with this as much as you like. And there's a lot to look at. I'll probably use this mostly on vocals, because as long as I'm not overly pushing the valve drive on that input stage there, you can get some real richness going on with vocals with VariMu compressor. Maybe in line with a different compressor as well, like the 76 style compressors, so that you're kind of leveling things off properly. Depends how you want to use it, but there's so much you can do. Have fun, everybody, and thanks, John. Thanks to TUKAN Studios.